بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. So we'll just take another page of these blessed sifat and traits of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah ta'ala bless us all to be from His people and to bless us to love them, to follow in their footsteps and to resemble them. Ya Arhamar Rahimin. And these are taken from verses in the Quran. So we've reached the verse 277 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Hum alladhina, the people of Allah are those whom amanu wa amilu salihat. And this has repeated itself over and over again as it does through the Quran. And when it repeats itself like that, this is not in vain. This is to emphasize its importance. That how many times do we read that? That amanu wa amilu salihat, amanu wa amilu salihat. They believe and they do righteous deeds. They believe and they do righteous deeds. This is the affair of the believer. They have faith and then they do righteous deeds. وَهَكَذَا وَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ. And they establish the prayer and they give charity. And then based upon verse 278, هُمَّ الَّذِينَ اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ. They are those who have taqwa of Allah. وَتَرَكُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا. And they give up outstanding interest. And there are those who that don't have usurious transactions to begin with. هم الذين إذا تدينوا بدين إلى أجل مسمى كتبوه. Based upon verse 282, which is called the Ayat ad-Dain. It's the longest verse in the Quran, the verse of debt. And so there are those whom, and this is a very practical one, easy for us to implement, but the vast majority of people don't implement this sunnah. There are those that when they contract a loan, they borrow money from someone for that has a fixed period of time, katabu, they commit it to writing. They write it down and they have witnesses to the loan that was taken and how much and when it's due and so forth and so on. And this is something we should do anytime that we borrow money. We should do this, even if it's to a family member, even if it's to a close friend. Have two witnesses. Write it down and have that people that take this outward measure, and this prevents a lot of disputes in the future and so forth and misunderstandings. And then based upon verse 285, هم الذين قالوا سمعنا وأطعنا الله أكبر. The true people of Allah are those who they say we hear and obey. سمعنا وأطعنا. As opposed to some of the people who came before us, that they would hear and then disobey. The believer, سمعنا وأطعنا. We hear and we obey. Whatever Allah tells us to do, marhaban. Whatever the Prophet ﷺ tells us to do, marhaban. We hear and we obey. Even if it seems like it's going to be difficult, khalas. We say سمعنا وأطعنا, and then Allah Ta'ala will lighten our load for us. غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير. We seek your forgiveness, and that unto you is the final return. And then, in the last verse that he includes here from Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 286, هُمَ الَّذِينَ, the people of Allah are those who say this blessed dua. And again, that the du'as of the Quran are the most important du'as that we can make. And then the du'as of the Prophet ﷺ, and then the du'as of the knowers of Allah and the Salihin. There are those who say, رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَخِذْنَا. That, O Lord of ours, do not punish us. إِن نَسِينَا. If we forget, أو أخطأنا, or that we make a mistake and sin. رَبَّنَا وَلَا تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْنَا إِصْرًا كَمَا حَمَلْتُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِنَا. Do not place a burden on us the way that you placed a burden on those who came before us. رَبَّنَا وَلَا تُحَمِّلْنَا مَا لَا طَاقَةَ لَنَا بِهِ. That Allah, do not burden us with more than what it is that we can bear. وَاعْفُ عَنَّا, pardon us. وَاغْفِرْ لَنَا, forgive us. وَارْحَمْنَا, have mercy upon us. أَنْتَ مَوْلَانَا, you are our guardian. فَانْصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ, and give us victory over the disbelieving people. And so, each one of these traits is a door, according to Imam Ghazali. Every good trait of character that we put into practice is a door that opens us between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of closeness. The more good traits that we have, the closer that we are to Allah ta'ala. The more doors that are then open between us and our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. تفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. From the book Etiquette with the Quran, التبيان في آداب حملة القرآن by Imam Abu Zakaria Yahya النووي نفعنا الله به وبعلومه في الدارين آمين. قال we're on chapter 4, page 21. Respecting the teacher. The student must look to his teacher with the eye of respect, believe in his competence completely, and his superiority over his contemporaries, since this makes it more likely that one will benefit from him. One scholar from the earlier generations would give something in charity whenever he went to his teacher and say, "O Allah, cover my teacher's faults for me, and do not take the spiritual blessing of his knowledge away from me." Rabi', the companion of Ash-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, said, "I did not venture to drink water while Ash-Shafi'i was looking at me, out of veneration for him." We relate that the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, said, "The rights the teacher has over you include that you give greetings to people in general, but single out him with greetings to the exclusion of the rest. They include sitting in front of him, not pointing with your hand in his company, not winking your eye at someone, not citing a position contrary to his, not backbiting anyone when in his presence. And they include not conferring with someone sitting near you while in his audience, not grabbing his garment, not being insistent when he has reservations about something, and not being inharmonious, such that you become fed up with accompanying him after a length of time. The student should discipline himself with these characteristics that Ali referred to, karamallahu wajhu. Also, the student rebuts any backbiting of a sheikh whenever he is able, and leaves that assembly if he is unable to do so.
Okay, so this is under the subsection of respecting the teacher. And here he gives us some other important points that we need to understand. And that he says, وَعَلِهِ أَنْ يَنْظُرَ مُعَلِّمُهُ بِعَيْنِ الْإِحْتِرَامِ. Anyone that teaches you, that you should look at them with the eye of respect. And there's a story that Imam al-Zarnuji mentions, Ta'lim al-Muta'allim, where someone loved his sheikh so much, respected him so much, the one time he was teaching. And then in class he stood up. And when he stood up, people were wondering why he stood up. And he says that the son of my teacher just passed by. Right? Son of his teacher passed by, he stood up, right? And it was his son, let alone the teacher himself. And again, as we clarified yesterday, is that this is, of course, that when we talk about real teachers, in the arrangement that we have set up here is more of a brother relationship, kind of an older brother, younger brother type situation, where, of course, there always has to be adab, but we have to put everything in its proper place. The adab that we should have adab with everybody. But then that the greater the teacher and the greater their rank with Allah and the greater their scholarship and the greater their state with Allah, the more adab we have. So there's degrees of adab. And this is also the same principle, is that the more something is sacrosanct and blessed with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more adab we have to have with that person or that place or that thing or that time. And this is why one of the reasons why the scholars especially mention the importance of avoiding sin in Ramadan. You have to always avoid sin. But we have that hadith that, although it's weak, the meaning is sound, is that the 5 things that break the fast of the one fasting. And that includes a number of different things, but among them, ghiba, backbiting, namima, that tale-bearing, that bearing false oath, gazing, lying, gazing with desire, and so forth. In other words, so that we're especially aware that in general we're not supposed to ever sin, but especially we're in a state that we're avoiding food and drink and other things that would normally that be permissible, we even more so, because it's more serious to sin while we're fasting and while you're in the month of Ramadan, especially in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. May Allah Ta'ala protect us and preserve us. So just as rewards could be multiplied based upon time and place and so forth and intention, all the other factors, is that likewise sins, is that doing a wrong against someone who's close to Allah Ta'ala is not like doing a wrong to someone who is distant from Allah Ta'ala. Both are bad, but one is worse. And that you misappropriating, stealing from someone who's poor and doesn't have anything else is that significantly more severe than you, that taking something from someone who is wealthy, even though both are haram. وهكذا. And so that it goes both ways. May Allah Ta'ala protect us and preserve us. But that's why it's good to accustom ourselves to learn how to have adab. Man arada salama, whoever wants safety, فَلْيَتَأَدَّبْ فَلْيَتَأَدَّبْ فَلْيَتَأَدَّبْ. Have manners, have manners, have manners. And I learned the hard way that you're not supposed to speak to someone of an Arab background and tell them to have adab. I was one time in Medina Munawwara, and we were eating breakfast, and you could see the haram. It was right there. And there was a Saudi man who was there, Arab. And the man, he was probably from Bangladesh or from some region in around Bangladesh. And he came up very nicely, and he was in the table right next to me. He came up very nicely to us and said, if there's anything else that you would like to get, please get it now, because we're going to lift up the buffet. We're going to take it in. And then the man looks at him, he says, أنت تخاطبني وأنا أكل? Right? You're going to speak to me while I'm eating? Allah. And I was right next to him. And I overheard it. I was just like, no, you can't say that. Like, what's wrong with you? هذا كبر أعوذ بالله. Right? In my heart, I was just like, how can I not say anything? Right? I mean, the Prophet ﷺ, and then I go, يا رجل أنت ما تشوف أنت قدام الحرم. You're right in front of the haram. أنت تخاطب شخص زي كده. أنا قلت تأدب. I told him, and there's probably a better uslub to speak to him. But then later it was kind of explained to me that if you tell someone to adab, it's essentially almost as if like you're cursing their mother that they didn't teach you manners. But still, he needed to learn adab. Maybe there was a better way to convey that meaning, but it's like, كيف هذا الكلام? You're in front of the Prophet ﷺ, you're treating someone like this? Is he your slave? Is he, إيش هذا الكلام? It's unbelievable, subhanAllah, these types of things that happen. I saw another thing, and fortunately I wasn't closer because I worried that I would have physically intervened. That this man, again, this individual probably from Pakistan. And something happened at the light, and I didn't see it. And I was walking across the street in Medina Munawwara going somewhere. And it's like a long crosswalk. And this guy was driving behind this other brother who was in front. I think he was from Pakistan. Honking, and this poor man pulls over. I was like, no, why you pull over? And then this Saudi man gets out. He's like enraged, right? And he's like, tell him to roll his window down. And then the poor guy rolls down his window, and he's just like going off on him, type of thing. And then he was like pushing him through the window, and then he spits on him. I was just like, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Like how, I mean, I had some really serious jahili thoughts come to my mind about what you want to do to someone like that. Like, أنت في مدينة رسول الله. You're in the city of the Prophet ﷺ, and you're acting like that. Like, what's wrong with you? Right? It's like, we need adab. We need adab. Right? And that adab, yes, it's with people that we had mentioned, but adab is with everybody. And one of the great ways to test our adab is that what is our adab with people that don't have the same social standing as us, that people don't have the same level of knowledge as us, that people don't have the same level of lineage of us or the same level of respectability in society, hakada. And that we have to be people of adab in all of our different affairs. And this is why he's going, how much has he been speaking? Pages and pages. And it goes on. Because this is the whole affair. In other words, if you get Quran and you don't have this, you could be destroyed. Right? We know about the Quran reciter will come on the day of judgment, and that Allah Ta'ala will ask him. He says, Ya Allah, that I recited Quran for your sake. Kadhabt. You lied. Right? You recited Quran so people could say that you are a qari, that you were a beautiful reciter. A'udhu billah. Right? وَقَدْ قِيل, and it was said. لَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ بِاللَّهِ. And that multiple different types of people that this is said. So that this is why this is so important. This is deen. It is inconceivable that you'll have a scholar that is a fasiq. Yes, there has been in human history and Islamic history, but in a real true scholar, it's inconceivable that they be immoral, that they be corrupt, that they be a profligate. Is that it has to be accompanied by taqwa and adab. And then وَيَعْتَقِدْ كَمَالْ أَهْلِيَتِهِ وَرُجْحَانُهُ عَلَى طَبَقَتِهِ. So this one, I think we can contextualize it a little bit. He says, one has to believe in his competence completely and his superiority over his contemporaries. And here I would just say is that there's different degrees of knowledge that different people have. And the most important thing is whatever it is that we're learning, that the person be competent to teach. And there's always going to be people that are more knowledgeable and that more well-known. And the nature of people is that they tend to incline towards the people that are more well-known. But that's not always the best thing to do, is that when we're making our decision about who it is that we study with, who do we take knowledge from, who do we learn from, that sometimes it's those that are well-known, but not always. You want to look a little bit deeper and ask people that you trust that know. Like, yes, so-and-so is known to be a person of knowledge, but this person has knowledge, but also is known to be a person of taqwa. And I know his connection to his shuyukh, and I know his teachers, and I know we want to look a little bit further. And so there's a baseline, yes, that there has to be a permission. That person who's teaching deen has to be permitted to teach. You can't just make stuff up in the name of the religion. You have to know who their teachers are. But there has to be a basic level of belief in his competence. And then he says that وَكَانَ بَعْضُ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ إِذَا ذَهَبَ إِلَى مُعَلِّمِهِ تَصَدَّقَ بِشَيْءٍ. And you get these incredibly beautiful adab. Is that one of those who came before from the earlier generations, a scholar, is that he would give something in charity every time he'd go to his teacher. Right? And in traditional societies where you're living amongst people and without cars and you're walking in the streets, they're so much healthier. When you go to like the old city in like Fez, Morocco, and in like Tarim and other traditional Muslim cities, they're so much healthier because you're mixing with people. You know your neighbors, you know the store owners, you're seeing people, you know where. And in traditional cities, the wealthy tend to live next to the poor. Right? This is a modern phenomenon where we have suburbs, and then there's degrees of suburbs, and then gated communities and so forth. Is that in traditional society, you'd have someone that was extremely poor right next to someone that was very wealthy. And look at the blessing. You can share. It's easy. Think about now if you wanted to go give someone physical charity, how you have to do it. Right? We're talking about right now, what organization do we want to recommend people give their zakat al-fitr to? Right? We should ideally be in a situation where we know exactly who needs zakat al-fitr, and we're able to do it. Right? So these are unfortunately things that we have to work with and overcome. But what did this individual do? He made a dua. Allahumma, he'd give out charity, and then he would say, Allahumma, oh Allah, ustur ayba mu'allimi anni. Veil my teacher's faults from me. Because teachers have faults. And again, there's degrees. And this is why we have to understand that teachers are not angels. Angels are ma'soom. Teachers are not ma'soom. They're not divinely protected. And I remember there was one of the great scholars, one of the shuyukh of Habib Umar, Habib Ibrahim bin bin Aqil. He was one of the kibar of the awliya, kibar of the ulama. And that one of his students just saw him on one occasion that coming out of the restroom. And he's like, Habib Ibrahim uses the bathroom. Right? And the point here is that we love our shuyukh so much is that sometimes that we almost don't associate like a human side to them, right? Which is fine if you just taking from your sheikh and so forth, but we have to put everything in its proper place. And in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man rules. And at a time where we really don't have too many true scholars in the lands in which we live. I'm talking about true scholars that we consider to be ulama in a traditional context. They're very few and far between. And so I have to be very careful with these labels. We throw around these things like Sheikh Fulan and Sheikh Fulan. And really, Sheikh Fulan is just, okay, he's kind of like a student of knowledge and learned a little bit of Arabic and can give like a nice talk and has a little bit of oratory skills, but they're not really shuyukh, yani. So we got to be careful with these things, because then what happens is Sheikh Fulan makes a mistake and people's deen suffers, right? If you have an older brother who you look up to, who's practicing but then slips up a little bit, it's not going to give you a crisis of faith. It's your older brother. You've seen them go through different things. You've seen them have good times. You've seen them have bad times. It's not going to give you a crisis of faith. So by putting everything in its proper place, having realistic expectations of how much we respect and that view the various shuyukh that we take from, this will protect us when you could have someone who's very well known, who makes a major mistake. But then you recognize is that he's a human being. And yes, if he makes a major mistake, there has to be consequences. And there could be a period of time where there should be a committee that says you can't teach and you have to step back. Right? But my point is that when we develop that maturity, is that we'll be prevented from having a crisis of faith when people make mistakes. Have realistic expectations for people are at. And then you have the real shuyukh. The shuyukh is that, I remember our teacher, Habib Adi, was telling us about this. He was mentioning some of the names of the great Habaib. And we say that, and he was saying like in Fulan, we took from him in the majority of his states. And Fulan, we took from him in the majority of his states. And then he just mentioned a few. He said, well, we took from them in every single one of their states, to the point where it's as if they don't have a human side to them. But of course, they're human beings. But it doesn't appear. It doesn't appear. Normal people get irritable, that they could get mad. They could have things happen. They could fall short in certain areas. Normal people, this happens. And he's going to get into this. But it's only like the real shuyukh of the highest caliber that rarely do these things ever happen, if they ever do. So put everything in its proper place is the whole point. So this is the dua that we make. Oh Allah, that veil, and unfortunately in our day and age where there's all this type of stuff out there about spiritual abuse and so forth and this type of thing, someone sees this and be like, what kind of dua is that? Why would you, shouldn't you want to see the faults of your sheikh? Because you shouldn't be taking from them if they really have faults. And so, no, this is understanding, this is from these things that you're recognizing that they're human beings and that they're faults that they have that they're working on, where they're not actively harming people and things of that nature. That's a very different thing, let alone abusing someone. So we put everything in its proper place. This definitely has its place. Not to want to see the faults, the shortcomings of your teachers. So we'd give charity and make this dua, Allah, veil from me the faults of my teachers. وَلَا تُذْهِبْ بَرَكَةِ عِلْمِهِ عَنِّي. And that do not take the spiritual blessing of his knowledge from me. And then that he quotes one of the great students of and companions of Imam Shafi'i, Rabi', that he says, "Majtaratu an ashrab al-ma'a wa Shafi'i yanzuru ilayya hibatana." I did not venture to drink water while Shafi'i was looking at me out of veneration for him. He had that much respect for his sheikh, right? That he was in awe of him. If he was looking at him, he couldn't drink water. Meaning, he would do that on his own. And when you're around people like, Marabat al-Hajj, people like Habib Abdul Qadir al-Saqqaf, people like Habib Ahmad Mashur al-Haddad, people like that Sheikh Abdullah Siraj al-Din, Sheikh Ahmed Dogan, some of the real great shuyukh. They have such a haiba. This is how you are, that you're just really careful about what you do. And this was how much love he had for his teacher and respect and awe of him. He says, and Imam Shafi himself was the Imam of Adab. Is that he says in the gathering of the Imam Malik, kunt at-tasaffah. I used to turn the pages of the book that I was reading in a way so that Imam Malik wouldn't hear. So he wouldn't hear the pages turn. He says, kunt at-tasaffah. I would just turn the pages very gently so that he couldn't hear the pages being turned as he's reading with him. And these are the adab of the great imams, and this is why they become great imams. And then he has this blessed statement of Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen radiallahu anhu. And he tells us here is that from the etiquettes that the teacher has over the student is that while the student sends salams to everybody in general, then he sends a specific salam to his teacher. Now, this is if it's in the middle of a class or something like that, that might be a different scenario. But this is if he comes to him and they're sitting in a group and there's an opportunity for him to speak to him directly. Now, and then he mentions some of the others where he says, sitting in front of him, وَانْتَجَسْ أَمَامَهُ. That's the adab. وَلَا تُشِيرِينَ عِنْدَهُ بِيَدِكَ. Not pointing with your hand in his company. So if you're sitting from your shuyukh and you are like pointing, right? That's not proper adab. Right? Not winking your eye at someone. So it's like, right? You should be focusing on the teacher. Right? It's not a time to play around and be joyful and playful and stuff like that. Right? This is time to focus. So I'm sure that in the seminary classrooms here, none of this behavior goes on. Everybody, mashallah, has adab, I'm sure. And everyone respects their teachers. And that is implementing all of this. Not citing a position contrary to his. So it's bad adab. The sheikh mentions a position. It's like, oh, but what about so-and-so said such and such a thing? Now, if you genuinely have a question, you can ask, right? But you don't show off knowledge that you have. If you need clarification, you ask with adab. Not backbiting anyone when in his presence. You shouldn't backbite on any occasion. But in general, we shouldn't be, and this is one of the meanings of this, there are some people who try to get close to teachers and religious people by mentioning bad things about other people. And this is a lowly thing. Any real person of Allah Ta'ala doesn't want you to mention bad things about other people. And our Prophet ﷺ indicated this. He wanted to go out with an open, clear heart towards the companions. Right? Because the problem is if someone mentions something to you about someone else, is that then you have to go out and meet people. And it takes a really strong person to be able to be in that field of counseling, to hear people's problems and things that happen between people, and then to be able to go out with a clean heart towards people. That takes a strong person to be able to do that. And it's possible. But in general, we don't want to be that type of person who, and my advice would be is that don't mention anything bad to your teacher about other people unless you absolutely have to. Just develop a habit of only speaking good about people. If there's something that happened that's really bothering you, you can mention it without mentioning someone's name. Khair. If you absolutely have to mention the name, then you can mention it. But don't get in the habit of just, conveying that bad things to your teachers about other people. And then he says here, not conferring with someone sitting near you while in his audience. Without tusarir. And that means speaking privately. So whispering to someone else that while you're in the majlis. وَلَا تَأْخُذْ بِثَوْبِهِ. Not grabbing his garment. Not being insistent when he has reservations about something. So the sheikh has reservations about something, but just, keep pushing. And then, وَلَا تُعْرَدْ أَيْ تَشْبَعْ مَنْ طُولِ صُحْبَتِهِ. Not being inharmonious. وَلَا تُلَحْ عَلَيْهِ ذَا كَسَلٍ. Or is it where you, maybe that's slightly different. Such that you become fed up with accompanying him after a long period of time. There might be some minor variations in the Arabic edition he's working with. But the one I have here is that you should reach a point where that you should never become satiated from being with your teacher. You should love being with them and want to be in their company for extended periods of time. No. And then the final thing that he mentions here is that part of the adab with your teacher is that if anyone says something bad about his teachers in his presence, is that he defends them. That's part of loyalty, right? We should defend any Muslim. Where someone speaks bad about them, you defend any Muslim, let alone your blessed teachers. Right? Now, if you're with someone who doesn't understand a particular position that one of your teachers took, that's something different. There's a big difference between that someone talking about a position that a sheikh takes and you disagreeing with that position, and speaking about the sheikh in a way where you're like that bringing that sheikh down and that pointing out his deficiencies. These are two very different things. There could be a position that a famous sheikh has that you're kind of questioning whether or not that's really the right position. Asking about that's fine, but not to the point where you're like that condemning that particular person and like bringing them down. There's a difference. It's a subtle difference. It's a subtle difference. There's a story one time where Sidi Abdulaziz Dabag mentions in the Ibris, and he's that Sidi Ahmed ibn Mubarak had found really problematic Imam al-Ghazali's position on what's called in the West the best of all possible worlds. And he was speaking about Imam al-Ghazali in a way where it was almost as if that he transgressed the bounds a little bit. It was like personal. Sayyid Abdul Aziz stopped him. He says, Imam al-Ghazali is a great qutb. And he says, even though he's in the barzakh, he still comes to me to learn regularly. These are the affairs of the people of Allah. They have experiences of the people in the barzakh, people are alive that are not present with them, and so forth and so on. But his point was, he was indicating to a student that, stop. You can have a critique of something he said, fine. If you're really a person of knowledge, and you have, you're a person of knowledge, excuse me, and you have the qualifications to actually put it forth a different position, but don't go beyond the limits when it comes to that. Tamam. He's going to talk about entering and exiting the lesson.
Entering and exiting the lesson. The student visits his sheikh with most excellent traits, keeping himself tidy with everything we have just mentioned concerning the teacher, cleanliness, regular use of toothstick, and a heart free of preoccupying matters. He does not enter without seeking permission when the sheikh is in a place that requires permission. The student greets the attendees upon entering, and then singles out his teacher with his greeting. Likewise, he bids farewell to him and the assembly in general when he departs, just as it is related in the hadith. The first greeting is no more deserving than the second. The student does not step over people and sits wherever the assembly's perimeter happens to be, unless the sheikh gives him permission to come forward, or he knows from the behavior of the other students that they prefer it. He does not let someone rise from his place out of deference, and if someone does give him preference, he declines it, still following the example of Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu, unless his coming forward is in the welfare of those present, or if the sheikh requested him to do so. He does not sit in the middle of the circle, except out of necessity. He does not sit between two companions except with their permission. And if they make room for him, he sits and squeezes himself in.
Allahu Akbar. So these are such beautiful etiquettes that he's mentioning here. So, whenever you enter into the presence of your teachers, is that you should be well kept. And there's a hadith that indicates this, where the Prophet ﷺ regarded highly those that there's a group of people, a delegation coming to see him, and they went and prepared themselves, took a bath, cleaned their clothing, wore perfume, and then came into the presence of the Prophet ﷺ. This is the way that we should be with our teachers, is that you want to make sure is that you have the right amount, your right clothing, that you have, that there's been maintenance in relation to your physical features and so forth, using the siwak, which is a sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ in relation to your breath and so forth and so on. And then فارغ القلب من الأمور الشاغلة. This is really important. And he translates that here as, and a heart free of preoccupying matters. Is that, yes, it's good to be in the company of the sheikh, but when you're in the company of the sheikh, you should focus. And if you know there's things that you have to do, go do those things and take care of those things. Get them done, and then go into the presence of the sheikh. If there's something that you have to do and you're just going to go visit the sheikh quickly, what you don't want is to be in the gathering and be like, oh, I got to go do this thing, right? It's better to get that thing done, right? And then visit the sheikh, and then that after that go back to whatever it is what you were doing. Now, and if the sheikh is in a place that needs that for you to seek permission, you seek permission. If it's a public place, then you just come in and join the gathering. No. And then he already mentioned the salams to the general people and then to the sheikh himself, if it's appropriate to do so. And that you also send salams when you leave. Okay, so let's just say it's kind of like a smaller room type gathering. A public gathering, it's not probably the best thing to come in and send salams because everyone who came in then, salam upon salam upon salam. But if it's like in someone's house, for instance, and oftentimes shuyukh will be teaching in their homes, still to this day, and you come in as kind of a smaller gathering, then you'd send salams in general, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And then when you make eye contact with the sheikh, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That's appropriate. And then after the reading's done, if you have to leave, you send a second salam. So you send a salam when you enter and then a salam when you leave. This is the sunnah. And then the hadith says, فَلَيْسَتِ الْأُولَى أَحَقْ مِنَ الثَّانِيَةِ, is that the first, there's not more right to the first salam than the second salam. In other words, is that both salams have a haq, there's a haq, a right for both salams. So you say salam when you enter, and then you say salam when you leave. And this is based upon a hadith of our Prophet ﷺ indicated that when you come into a gathering, is that you greet, and you send a salam. And then when you leave, and then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this meaning about both having a right. And then the adab, وَلَا يَتَخَطَّى رِقَابَ النَّاسِ. So تَخَطَّى رِقَابَ النَّاسِ, your riqab or your shoulders, is that when people are, imagine it kind of being filled here, is you're walking over people. Okay? Is that we're not supposed to do this. Rather, يَجْلِسْ حَيْثُ يَنْتَهِي بِهِ الْمَجْلِسِ. You should sit at the back of the gathering, and that wherever the assembly's perimeter happens to be. Even if you're an advanced student, even if you're someone who is distinguished, and that this is the adab. And then that in the process of recognizing the majlis is that the elders should be given preference, and they should be given preference, the preferred seating. They should come to the front. If they need a chair, that you help them get a chair. And that one of the blessings of having the elders at the front is so that you can gaze upon them. Because at one point, they were sitting there, right? So Sadiq's going to really get mad at me now. But like, look at this beautiful face. This is a face that gazed upon Imam Ahmed Mashhur bin Taha al-Haddad, one of the greatest of the Arifin and the Awliya and the Salihin of our time. And when you look at him, you're looking at someone who looked at Habib Ahmed, and Habib Ahmed looked at him. And the gaze there in real life of actual eye-to-eye contact and him seeing not just you, but your essence and everything about you, and then the gaze remains. It's not even if you would physically turn away. When you talk about a gaze from the Arifin Billah, and the knowers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't just end there. And it continues on. And even if they return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the gaze continues. And you live in their inayah, and they're concerned, and they look after you. Even from the barzakh, even to this very day and age, and it just goes on. It extends even to your offspring and so forth. And so hakada. This is the blessing. So there's a wisdom in the elders sitting towards the front. And we should look at them with that intention to look at those who were looked at by the great. And then this is a secret of the nadar. The gaze that is with an unbroken chain back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, unless that the sheikh permits that person to come forward. So sometimes that in a gathering, for instance, if someone's going to sing nasheed, is that it's appropriate for the munshid to be sitting up front where they can. If someone's going to be reading, the one reading should be sitting up front. If someone's going to be reading the awrad, for instance, or something like that, or hakala. And so in general, is that our Prophet says, "Liyalini ulul ahlami wal nuha." The Prophet says, asked that certain spots be left behind him in prayer. Right? And this was always the case in Dharma stuff, even though people rush to the first row, which was good, is that few spaces are always left right behind the Imam. And the same thing should be here. Is that a few spaces here should be left right for the teachers, for the people who need to be there. And sometimes everyone crowds in, and unfortunately our musalla is not very wide. But then people that need to speak to, people that you need to indicate to, people that you need to grab the microphone to say a message are not next to you, right? So these spaces right here should be left open for the people that are conducting the majalis and need to be there. And if something happens, or to that now step forward if the imam has to leave or something of that nature. All right, so everything has to be put in its proper place. So there's exceptions to this rule. And if it's though that just other than those exceptions, he does not let someone rise from his place out of deference. And if someone does give him preference, he declines it still, following the example of Ibn Omar, the blessed companion, Abdullah ibn Omar. And that he heard the Prophet ﷺ saying, he narrates this hadith, لا يقيم أحدكم أخاه من مجلسه ثم يجلس فيه. Let none of you make his brother stand up from where he's sitting and then let's sit in that spot. A'udhu billah, you can't do that. Even if the person's young, even if they're beneath balugh, even if they're 10 years old, you cannot do that. Say, get up, I'm sitting here. La, a'udhu billah. Right? This is a command of the Prophet. It's a prohibition that tells someone to get up and then that sit in their spot. So that if someone, for instance, needs to just go rinse their mouth or that quickly go get a glass of water, that you can come and put your shawl down or something indicates that that's your spot. And then when you go, if someone took your spot, you can move them because they shouldn't have sat in your spot. But if you want to, like, for instance, from Maghrib time, save your spot, right, for Isha, right, you have to be sitting there and just get up quickly and come back. Right? If you can't just leave your shawl there for like an hour, right, while you go eat and so forth, and then think that your spot's saved, you got to get back, right, to assume that spot. A quick need, that's fine. So, Sayyid Ibn Umar, this is how he was. And Qara Salim Mawla Ibn Umar, his Mawla, Sayyidina Salim. He said, فَكَانَ رَجُلُ يَقُومُ Ibn Umar فَلَا يَجْلِسْ فِيهِ. So said Ibn Umar, he put this hadith into practice. Someone would stand up for him and he would refuse to take his spot. And so this is a part of adab. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all to be people of adab. And he does not sit in the middle of the circle, obviously. So if you had like a circle of learning, someone to come just plop right in the middle, that's not the best adab. He does not sit between two companions except with their permission. So naturally, when people are studying, there's certain people that you're going to be closer to than others. And we need to develop a level of maturity. And that we give everybody their baseline haqq. And naturally, we're going to incline towards some people more than others. And so with seating arrangements, people that like each other tend to sit near each other. And so the adab is, if you know people are close and have a closer relationship than some other people, you don't come and just sit right between them where you separate them. No. Adab. You put everything in its proper place. And of course, this is except with their permission. And if they make room for him, he sits and squeezes himself in. But it's a good thing for people, as people are coming into the gathering, if it's crowded, to make room for them. This is a good thing. Make room for people. Right? And that when we make room for people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up the doors of His mercy to us. Okay, subhanAllah. We started late today, Afwan. Stop there, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Tafadhal.
يرعاني يا المصطفى في كل شان وحال يرعاني يا المصطفى في كل شان وحال به